Mm. Good evening. At some point I should have a proper jacket and a pipe. Good evening. For this evening's explorations, we're going to dive into the depths of the soul, the entrance of mysteries, if you're ready. Yeah, I totally would have been a theater geek if I'd gone to public school. I would have had a blast with that. So, for tonight I want to talk about my mind has been a little buzzy and a little through a bunch of today. At the same time, I have been finding this other place to stand, and the interaction of the two over the last day or so has made my root growth rate into the stillness outside of mind a little slower. So there's a little disorientation when I go, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, let me boot up the mind. So that's what that was about. And I was laughing because, here I tried to start and I just noticed, I'm walking into a bear trap. How about I don't do that? So I've been reading this book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And I was talking to my family about the book earlier this evening, because a bunch of the ideas are things that are very similar to things I remember my father teaching me when I was 9. Well, technically when I was 8. This was in preparation for my 9th birthday. It was going to have this whole big ceremony where there was a kind of initiation into the realms of, like, I'm trying to figure out how to give the context for that. But it was like a kind of a family ceremony of stepping into a greater level of lucidity. Very profound for a 9-year-old. I remember, I guess it was technically on my 9th birthday, Dad had started in the morning by saying, now tonight, son, we are going to have a ritual in which we will induct you into the world of magic. Before this, you're going to have to answer a question, and I want you to think very carefully about this question. Are you listening? Okay, here's the question. Who are you? You just left me with that all day. And I had known enough from the way that Dad thinks to know the answer is not going to be, I'm Michael. That is your name. But who are you? I'm your son. That is your role. Who are you? Right, so this is a game that Dad had played before. I'd read some of his writings where he was exploring this kind of question. Dad would call the thinking process involved with this the de-identification process. And this ties directly to the Untethered Soul stuff. This is interwoven here. The idea is, so Dad's example is he used to work at a mental health hospital where he was in part responsible for evaluating whether people were mentally and emotionally stable enough to be allowed out. He would work in the schizophrenia ward. And so one of Dad's questions is, all right, do you see this coffee cup? All right, okay, cool, glad you see the coffee cup. And so I've got a question for you. Are you this coffee cup? Okay, so technically it's 3 questions. The first is, do you see this coffee cup I'm holding? Just like if they can't do that, then no, they don't get out. The second question, are you this coffee cup? Part of the reason for that is that most forms of psychosis, and schizophrenia in particular, create a lot of difficulty with tracking identity boundaries. To varying degrees, but if somebody is in a dangerously dysfunctional space, they have difficulty saying whether or not they are the coffee cup. It's hard for them to tell. So that's a second check. Are you this coffee cup? I don't think so. Ah, okay. So the third question would be, how do you know you are not this coffee cup? And the dad's reports, nobody gave the right reply by his standards. And no one gave a coherent answer to that question that would actually work. And they'd say things like, well, because I'm over here and the coffee cup is over there. Okay, great. But so you have this sense of there being a distance, but how do you know that you are on one side of that distance and the coffee cup is on the other? Now, of course, Dad was playing this game where he was defining what the answer was and then saying, can you guess the answer in my head? But the real value of asking that question was to watch how people struggle with attempts to articulate. If they start going, I don't know, maybe I am the cup. I'm like, okay, then there's something to poke here to check. How is the identity boundary working? So the kind of answer that Dad preferred, and this shows up in Untethered Soul, I just found this fascinating. I think I've been encountering this for a quarter century, and here I am bumping into it in a book. It's, as far as I know, is unconnected to any of my family's practices. Because I can experience the cup, I know I'm not the cup. It's not about distance, it's about experience. If I am premising that there is a being who is doing the experiencing, then I am experiencing the cup, and therefore I'm not the cup. And this is a really neat move, which is, it's important. Like, I actually was mentioning this a couple days ago, basically on doing math for emotions and experience instead of numbers and shapes. That there's something important about doing that for each instance. Oh, I'm not my fingernails. In fact, I know that because I'm going to clip my fingernails, and I don't mourn the loss of my fingernails unless I put a lot of emotional investment in them. But it feels like I am clipping my fingernails and they go away. Okay, the clippings go away. How do I know I'm not the clippings? Well, I do. But what part of my experience tells me that? Well, the part where I'm experiencing it. That's part of why it's hard to say, because there it is, I'm experiencing it. Same thing with each of my fingers or my hands. And this gets a little confusing because I'll often say things like, I'm holding the coffee cup. Technically, it's my hand that's holding the coffee cup, but there's a kind of invisibility. Part of the point of that invisibility is that when I say I'm holding the coffee cup, my focus is on the cup. And I'm approximately not experiencing my hand, I'm experiencing through my hand. So it's exactly the invisibility of my hand that gives me the impression that my hand is me, or is part of me. It makes the sense of where I stop and the rest of the world begins a little more fluid. But when I'm looking at my hand, like if there's a pain in my hand, or like if my thumb is doing a twitchy thing, now suddenly it's my thumb. I'm not saying I'm twitching. I mean, I could say that, that would be coherent. But there's a naturality to, oh, my thumb is twitching, and I'm looking at it as an anatomical object because I'm now focused on experiencing it. So that distinction between experiencer and experience, this is a piece of philosophy that's been in my family for as far back as I can remember. And so it's just neat to see it in this book. So it feels like this book was, as far as I've gotten, I'm about halfway through right now. It feels like it's largely two segments. It's the de-identification process together with the mechanics of how the heart interacts with energies. That's its own beautiful thing, and it's something that I am actively working on understanding better. It's really nice to hear and feel a very clear phenomenological breakdown of this. But The description I just gave in terms of the coffee cup and experiencer experience is it's a very classical way that my family has talked about this for a long time. There is something really cool in Singer's book for experiencing doing that move with the mind. Now, this is something I've talked about before. I've got this little notification showing up. It says, you want to post this to groups, don't you? No, I don't. It doesn't matter if you ask me every 5 minutes, I still don't. So when I've been talking about, in past videos, I referenced the distinction between you and your mind. I give some quick examples like, oh, what did you eat for breakfast? Okay, and your mind comes up with an answer. Noticing that you ask yourself the question, what did I eat for breakfast? And there's a trying, but then something responds to the trying. You're not really involved in the response. It's like you talk to something, and that something does a process. It's almost like you have a clerk in your head. You can turn to the clerk and say, what was the name of the main star in the original Matrix film? And there's a particular inner move you do. It's not just about asking the question in words. It's about a type of, who was it? There's an efforting. And that efforting does something. Your job is the effort, but the something goes off and does a job. And that job involves going out, doing some research, and coming back and making an assertion. He was Matt Damon. No, no mind. Try again. It was not Matt Damon. Okay, I agree. Matt Damon is an actor, but try again. So there's something fascinating about this sequence of there is the request to the mind, and then the mind floats off and does some work, comes back with an answer, and then you evaluate whether the answer is correct. And so just noticing that experience. To the extent of being able to notice that experience, there's kind of a gap created in the experience, much like you've been walking around with a coffee cup plastered to your forehead, saying, "Oh no, don't strike me here, you'll break me." Well, I mean, it's a cup. So if you can hold the cup at a bit of distance and go, "Oh, I am experiencing the cup," like that distance makes it a little bit easier to see, oh, it's a cup. I use the cup. I'm not the cup. Right. I'm the one looking at the cup. Right. So the same thing happens with the mind. Singer's way of approaching the thing with the mind, I just thought was beautiful. It was really clever. The mind talks all the time. It just keeps talking. Singer gives some quick examples, like try saying hello in your head. Can you hear that? Well, if you can hear that, then you aren't the one saying hello, you're the one listening. What's saying hello? You're doing a thing, and then there's a sound, and then you hear the sound in your head. Try yelling it. Okay? Try yelling it twice. Hello, hello! Isn't that curious? You can sort of make the voice say different things. But one move that most people can't do is have the voice stop talking. Right? So you just pay attention. You can notice, well, what were the words that just went through the mind? And then for many people, they may not be words. They may not track as words. For me, that often appears as sort of a texture, a sensation, and a movement, a gesture of meaning, and that I could articulate it pretty easily, but it's not primarily in words for me. So I suspect this varies between people, and Singer happens to think in words. Some people just think in words more. I think in words less. It's a little strange given the way that I articulate. feel myself putting on airs. I enjoy the airs. I enjoy the bit of theatricism, and I also want to stay open, and I want to be accessible. I want to be felt here. So Singer's trick was first notice the words, notice the incessant talking, and then instead of pretending that you are thinking these thoughts, just bop. Imagine that you have somebody who is this roommate who's next to you, talking all the time, sometimes talking to themselves, sometimes talking to you, sometimes arguing with themselves, and you don't say anything, you're just listening. Oh, how do I do that? Just imagine, instead of asking, how do I do that? It's this. It's your roommate saying, how do I do that? I'm not quite sure how to do that. Wait, am I doing it right? I should check to see whether this figure is talking right. I better come up with some good phrases. What do I think now? Maybe I should do some push-ups. Yeah, so I haven't worked out in a while, but I also want to be careful with my shoulders. It's like, okay, great. So now it's over there. And I can just watch. Like when I do this move, I can just watch. Oh, okay. It is kind of a fun move with enough anchoring and stillness, it is actually possible to experience silence. That's really good. It's really yummy. It's relieving. The Singer's invitation is just take a shower and watch what this roommate has to say. Try watching a movie. Right? Watch how many times your attention gets pulled from the movie. A lot of meditation is largely a matter of getting acquainted with this crazy roommate and noticing, oh, okay. So I found that exercise just really clever, just immensely clever. Like, oh, here's this way of using the social function of the mind to get the mind to output a projection of itself so that you can create distance. You're using the mind to create distance with the mind. It's fascinating. It's really clever. And then he goes on to make a claim that I found really curious. What it highlights for me is either, I mean, in practice, I think I just disagree with him about a detail. Although I guess if you think he's just speaking the truth, what I'm revealing is I am less spiritually advanced than Mr. Singer. But he makes the claim that the real beginning of the fruition of spirituality comes from recognizing that there is no end to, first off, that this person is insane. And frankly, I agree. For the most part, the mind is insane. For most people, most of the time, this Babel machine is, I've used the term psychotic. And this is part of what I mean by, if you actually understand what psychosis is, there's something like hypopsychosis as a standard infrastructure for culture. This is a projection of that psychosis. What you end up looking at is a psychotic person. And this is psychotic, like, where the hell are my identity boundaries? Am I that cup? It's rarely quite that extreme. The boundary between neurosis and psychosis can be a little blurry, and this is clearly a neurotic person. But that's part of the perception, recognizing, oh, this thinking process, this doesn't make sense. But it keeps dragging my attention to it. It keeps going, hey, what are you, hey, pay attention to me. Go away, but. Right? So to notice that, notice the predicament, and to cultivate this desire, can I please be free of this? How do I get this to shut up. Although it gets even trickier, because if you think, how do I get this to shut up? Guess who's talking? Right? One thing to track here is, like, it makes sense for this commentary. This kind of commentary is really powerful for things like, this person just frowned at me. I have no idea why. That's curious. And just like making a note so that it's easy to track. Like that can actually be useful if there's a mental infrastructure as a tool set that turns out to be available. It's sort of like having a servant saying, would you care for any tools? I brought out some tools for you, sir. What would you care to employ at this moment? Oh, thank you, Jeeves, not right now. Or, oh, this is excellent, thank you. This gives me some potential insight into this frowning person. Right? So it's like there's a type of use there that I think can be very powerful. Most people don't know how to use their minds that way, though. The default thing is more like you're looking up at this beautiful sky from the sunset, covering the lights. You're covering the clouds with this beautiful display of pinks and purples and reds and orange, and it's gorgeous. You're just looking up at that. And then this insane person comes over and says, wow, those are really pretty. I was looking at this, thank you. I know, isn't it great? Whoa! It's like, what's the talk for? I'm already looking at the beauty. Why do I need to say, wow, that's so beautiful? What are the words for? It's a habit. There's an answer to that question. The words are actually for distracting from receiving the beauty. That's the actual purpose. It pulls you out of attention, and it gives you a way of grabbing onto the experience around you and employing something that is in the mind. And there's a lot about the structure of the mind that we don't have a very clear mental picture of. The mind has a very poor internal user's manual. So when it's told to run the show, it does some very strange things. So the place where I have a small disagreement is in the attitude that, how do I get rid of it? How do I get rid of this insane roommate? There's something like that's a much better step than not wanting that. But there's a puzzle here. I think what this is, what the talking machine is the same thing that Ian McGilchrist identifies as the left hemisphere of the brain. So when I put it over here, and I'm talking about the left hemisphere, but it is actually appropriate. The left hemisphere governs the right half of the body. It is the reason why we are mostly right-handed, because the hands are for handling, or the Latin for that would be, or the Latin-derived word for that would be manipulate, the manos, hands, to manipulate our environment. It's a very goal-driven. Language looks like it may be an extension of the attempt to create and use tools in order to manipulate the environment. So it's all one mechanism. It's the reason why the language center of the brain is on the left hemisphere, even though the right comprehends language much better. The talking center is right about here, Broca's area on the left hemisphere. If we... there's an evolutionary lens that I think is really beautiful. There's an excitement going. There's like a coherent theory. This is the mind getting hungry to share for me. I want to anchor in stillness. There's a reason why we evolved a left hemisphere. It wasn't a mistake. If we were to somehow systematically shut down the left hemisphere, we would end up developing tools that are equivalent to a left hemisphere. And then we would be back in this predicament. It just keeps happening. So what I'm looking at, which I think is equivalent, but it seems important to note it as something more precise. I don't think the goal is to make the talking engine shut up or to make it go away. I think it is more like recognizing that the talking thing is a computer and that I can program the computer. That's a thought. That's something the mind can understand, but there is a direct perception. I, which apparently is referring to the right hemisphere of the brain, which is a fascinating way of doing it. Here's this framework in which you can identify with the not talking part. I think that part of the Singer's work is very clever. I sort of went to Singer and McGilchrist to have conceptual babies. Because that's like the merger of the two. It's just this beautiful opportunity. It's not ripe in my head, but this is what's alive for me at the moment. So there's something about I'm losing track of it. Feeling a little bit of tension in my core as I'm trying to talk about this. Like, it's slipping a little bit, and I'm trying to make a point, and then I want to deliver to the audience, and then I start to lose track. I do think Singer is right about if you're going to do one move, there's one very clear move that I think is important. It's the one that matters, which is in the same way that it's possible for me to bring my attention to the cup, but in doing so, my hand becomes invisible. And I can zoom in on the feeling of my finger. I can examine how my finger is, and then there's something about when I'm doing that, the cup becomes extra opaque. I have a little bit of distance, but I can now, I have a little bit more sense of my finger as an object, but my arm is still my subject. It's still part of me. I'm exploring my finger. Let me touch my finger. Well, that's interesting. I'm touching my finger with my thumb. But I'm saying I'm touching my finger. That makes sense. So being able to notice, I can actually zoom in and out. I can control something about, similar to, going in the other direction. This is borrowing an example from Vervaeke. If a modified example from Vervaeke. If I wanted to, let me see, what would be a good example? Use, I'll go ahead and use my phone here. So if I wanted to close my eyes and then tap to explore the shape of the cup through the phone, there's a way where the phone becomes an extension of me. I can't feel the tactile exactly, but I can feel something about the vibrations through the phone. And I guess I'm hiding this a little bit. And so by paying attention to this, the phone becomes invisible. Like metaphorically, but it's something that I'm not really, my attention isn't landing on as subject instead of object. Let's say I'm exploring this cup, but I was doing so with the phone. So I can sort of zoom out or zoom in. And there's something very powerful about, well, what if I zoom in all the way? Like, I can experience my body, so I'm not my body. I am no part of my body. That talk in my head, that was part of this game of seeing this distance. Oh, that talk in my head, that's not me either, because I can experience it. my feelings too, my ambitions, like the thoughts that aren't articulated as words. Excuse me. Pain and pleasure, desire. No, I can experience those. So I'm the one experiencing them. That's a thought experiment. That's the Babel machine. If I can enact it, if I can go down into experience and notice in the experience, who am I? Who is experiencing this? And notice I can't even use that thought. The thought, oh, I'm experiencing that thought. I'm experiencing the question. Who is experiencing the question? In there's an experience of what Douglas Hofstadter would call a strange loop, a bit of self-reference. I am. How do I know? Because that's what knowing is. In that place, when I say that place, you actually get a hint of, the thing talking is not directly connected to the experience because it's modeling it from the outside. In that place there, in this kind of experience, in this part of the map here, this will have this effect, which means that the thing pointing is not in the map. So let me try that again. While I am alive to myself, everything else is very clear. I can see it. It's like I am a pinprick experiencing this. And then there is clarity. Who's experiencing this? Well, it's a little bit like I'm watching. There is will, there is intent. I can choose to move these fingers. Who is choosing? I am. But not the thing talking. Practicing this moving back into that point, feeling this self-reference loop. Then all these tools, they're in front of me. That's really cool. It is a lot of fun. It can be very disturbing. There's a part of Singer's work that brings up, in fact, some of the things that I was talking about yesterday. And I don't want to go into those now. I endeavor to learn to give shorter videos. And this bit about insight, I find very lovely. Yeah. And I particularly really like Singer's like roommate in the head example or metaphor. It's very effective. So, an invitation to you, if you've watched this far. If you want to play with this, and I actually think the Singer's book, Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul, so far it strikes me as quite good. Like I said, I'm about halfway through. Very, very clear. When I say clear, what I mean is that he's describing the experience. He's occasionally linking this to spiritual teachings, but he's mostly just saying, hey, look, you know that talk in your head? You know, the narration that goes on all the time? Like, here are some things you can do to see it. I actually used some of his examples here. When I said the hello thing, that came from him. That was an idea from him. So he gives these these examples, which I find very straightforward to go, oh yeah, that is the structure of consciousness. A lot of it is very mentally familiar and experientially familiar, and it's just neat to not only see, yep, that is how they sync up, but also to have this sort of deepening in the clarity of the description. It's very simple, very straightforward. Still have a little disorientation about his model for what I would say is processing trauma. The overall energetics of it, I think, are very clear and are basically right. There's something like a core question, which is, what's with the being with? That part I find a little confusing. It's been tricky for me because sometimes I find that I actually digest better by disconnecting from my experience, by putting effort in and then looking away. It actually processes better that way sometimes, like any skill. But that's for another time. So the invitation, if you want to play with this, if you want to explore it, if you're up for reading the book, that's a very direct way to do it. And if you want to explore with this one-pointed consciousness, this is just one direction for meditation. I want to emphasize there's a different direction. There's sort of this non-dual expansiveness where everything is transparent instead of everything being opaque. But you can just explore, in particular, the place that I suspect the strongest effect is going to be for most people is, can you first experience your body with no sense that it is you? And then go even farther in. Can you experience your mind? That second part is more key. The first part is useful for being able to track, are you actually answering this question from an experiential point of view? Can you feel how you can experience your legs? You are experiencing your legs, therefore you are not your legs. Not just the logic, not just going, I agree with this idea, but the actual lived experience. There will be a shift. There will be a somatic shift when this clicks. You'll get it, and then it'll go, right. And when you feel each part of the body, there will be a sense of, okay, I am actually experiencing my body. First off, like that's a trick, getting yourself to actually experience your body. Many people have difficulty with that one. Coming into experiential contact with the body and going, and therefore I'm not the body. I am no part of the body. I can still use it. I can still work through it. My identity boundary can flow out to it so that I still treat it as me sometimes, but I don't have to stay confused. But then getting to the mind, seeing this chatterbox. Consider playing with that experiment. Try hanging out with your crazy inner roommate. You don't have anything to say. There's no Broca's area on the right hemisphere of the brain. There's no talking center. There's just understanding. So go take a shower. Go take a walk. And listen to what this crazy person has to say. Your only task is to notice each thought, each phrase. Don't pay attention too much to the content. You're just focusing on the fact of the talking and the fact that you experience the talking. That's it. You go for one walk, and if you've never had an experience like this before, you come back and you have clarity. You'll have a type of clarity. If you come back with that type of clarity and you're going, oh God, what now? Try reading the book. I have plenty of things that I could say about it too. There's lots of resources out there, but that book, The Untethered Soul, I think is quite good. At least the first half. Okay, I think that's me for tonight. Thanks for watching.